Hello, everyone that has is already joined. I think we're probably going to have a few participants joining us over the next few minutes as everyone gets to grips with Zoom. But so lovely to have you all here joining me on this quite cold Saturday. But so the purposes I think of today are that I am going to be sort of a vessel for you to be able to ask any questions at all about working in the West End and what it means to get into shows and how all that, how the ins and outs of all that work. I've sort of split up the next hour into a few different sections just so that we can focus questions and I can hopefully give you the best answers possible. So I'll run you through that in a little moment. But yes, so a bit of background on me is my name's Alex Hammond, and I was a participant of BYMT when I was a teenager. I did 3 different summer residentials, and then went to Leeds University where I studied theatre and performance, and then went to the Royal Academy of Music, did a postgrad course in musical theatre, and then ended up working in the wonderful world of performance and of musical theatre. So most recently, I started Pretty Woman the musical, which obviously has had to be put on ice very unfortunately, but hopefully we'll be back in September. And prior to that, I was in Matilda for 1.5 years. And then I've been in so many other shows, from fringe shows to tours to pantomime to bits of film and bits of TV. So I've sort of done a bit of a cross section over the last 10 years. And I was also the resident director of Motown the musical in the West End for 6 months as well. So I've got a real sort of a broad knowledge of what it means to be working in musicals and in the West End in particular. So hopefully this is just going to be a really nice opportunity for you guys to just fire any questions. I'm sure you're all experiencing the same cabin fever that I am, and finding yourselves, feeling like the 4 walls that you're surrounded by are getting smaller and smaller. So hopefully we can have a bit of escapism and just talk about the wonderful world of theatre. So if you have any questions to ask, if I could just ask that you put them into the Q&A section, then I can see a list of them and I can hopefully answer them. And I think there's a feature for putting your hands up, and we can maybe facilitate some kind of discussion in that, which will be helpful. But also you can use the chat section, but maybe that's better for any sort of sharing any information between yourselves, or if you want to continue a chat about something, but I can maybe try and stay on task with the Q&A. So hopefully that will all work fine. Now, you might have to bear with me slightly. I'm a bit of a technophobe, and Zoom is very new technology to me, and I'm sure people are going to be much better than I am at it. But here we go anyway. So the first topic, I think let's sort of start with, let's maybe talk about auditions for the first sort of 10 minutes. So any questions you have at all about auditions, let's start with that and see how we go. So let me have a look at these. So, yeah, these are all great questions that people are asking already. So I'm going to start with, Helen, your question about what's the best advice for getting noticed in the industry. It's sort of, there's lots of different ways of looking at it. I think my advice would always be that you need to just be the best person in the room as a person, and in terms of your just putting out the most positive attitude and be the best company member you possibly can be. Ultimately, if you want to have a long career in the industry, you want to get a really good rep for yourself. And you might find that some people are noticed very, very quickly, and they might have a burst of a couple of shows and they go straight to lead roles, but then actually you find that they're quite difficult people and they get a bit ahead of themselves and then they don't work again for years and years. Whereas I've found that the more you really think about what kind of person you are and how you want to be represented, the better you will get on in the industry, and the more you'll find that then producers and casting directors are coming to you and are coming to your agent to do that. So yeah, I would say that that's the best thing in terms of being noticed and always being kind of well known as a good egg in the industry. Let's just have a look. Yes. Oh yeah. So Jenny, your question about how do you choose audition material all sort of depends on what show you're auditioning for. So normally you would be asked in a first round of an audition to perform two different songs in contrasting songs, but in the style of the show. So that might mean one ballad and one up-tempo song, or sort of two songs that would be different. But generally you want to get to grips a little bit with the theme. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen with you guys, actually, because I've got a list of some things that might help with that. So let me just find this. Tell me if this works. So hopefully I'm sharing this with you now. This is all about rep folders and about different styles of music that you should have in your rep folder for audition material. So in every rep folder means repertoire, so all your different musical theatre songs that you would have. So I would always have a pop song, a rock song, which can be not necessarily from musicals, but actually, legit proper pop songs and rock songs. A ballad, so something slow and something that's got some real storytelling to it. An up-tempo MT, so something contemporary, something that's got a real beat to it, sort of in that sort of Hairspray or something like that allows you to show off the up-tempo. A folk song, so something that's a bit more traditional, something that would be right for a show like Once, or something like Warhorse, or a show like that. Then a legit, which is your sort of older style of singing, like a Rodgers and Hammerstein. And something which shows off that sort of real heavy vibrato, developed sound. Always good to have a Sondheim, Stephen Sondheim, for anyone who doesn't know him. He is an incredible composer, but writes quite complex music, but brilliant character-driven stuff. So it's always good to have a Sondheim. And then a character song, something that might show off an element of your acting, which takes you away from sort of your natural characteristics and personality, but shows that you have a breadth of ability in terms of your character acting. Something English, we find a lot of musical theatre is American, contemporary American, so it's really good to have something like a Mary Poppins or a Matilda or something in there which is very English. And then a classic MT, which is sort of similar to the legit, of Rodgers and Hammerstein or something like that. But yeah, basically going back to the idea of what's the best thing to choose for an audition is ultimately that you want to work out what songs are in the show that you're auditioning for, and then try and find something that you feel fits within that remit. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me keep going. So Max, your question about how important is the theatre school that you train at? It is a very important thing. That's really fundamental part of your training is going to a drama school. So there's no real right or wrong, and everyone has a completely unique route into the industry. But ultimately, the best thing that you can do, I think, is to get all of the syllabuses, get on all the websites of every single drama school that you've heard of or that you think you might be interested in, and really try and get a flavour of what they're about and what they lean towards in terms of their strengths. Certain drama schools will focus more on other. There might be sort of more dance heavy, or there might be more music heavy, or more acting heavy. But ultimately, you will get a feel straight away. Obviously, at the moment in the current climate, you can't go and visit these drama schools. But once all the restrictions are lifted and you can, I'm sure there'll be lots of open days. And I would just say get to all of them. If there are any summer courses or weekend courses that those drama schools are offering, try and get to them so you can get a real feel and a flavour of what that theatre school is all about and whether you feel like you would fit in with the feel of it. So I trained at the Royal Academy of Music, which was a postgrad course after I'd done my degree, and that worked brilliantly for me. It was sort of a 9-month, very intensive course, and gave me all the tools I needed to then launch myself into the industry. But equally, for some people, it might be that they prefer to do a 3-year course, which would give you a much sort of greater foundation in things like dance and other things, which then means that you're coming out as a sort of a whole package performer. So basically, research is the key. The more research you can do, the better. Okay, so Amy Fisher's question about how do you prepare yourself for auditions? I'm just going to try and share my screen with you. because I think there's something that might be helpful in this one as well. So just 1 second. Bear with me, everybody. Yeah, here we go. So hopefully I can now share this with you all. Sorry, I'm not in the screen share. In which case, don't worry, I'm just going to tell you. I'm going to tell you about it live. So basically, but when you're thinking about an audition, I would say that there's really important things like know your route, to know exactly how you're going to get to that audition. There's nothing worse than panicking close to the time and then finding that you're really flustered. Always arrive early. So give yourself a good 15 minutes before your allotted time, and even then maybe 10 minutes before that. There's honestly, there's nothing worse than running and dashing into an audition and then finding you're going straight into the room. Always look professional. So this goes for sheet music as well as what you're wearing. So you should never come in costume per se, but perhaps think about the era and the style of the show and what that would mean in terms of how formal you come dressed. If you're going into something like Phantom or for Les Mis, err on the side of a little bit more professional. But if you're in for something like In the Heights or something which is sort of much more contemporary, and then you can maybe loosen it up a bit. And with your sheet music, always turn up with it properly taped or in a folder so that the MD who's going to be playing for you knows exactly how to play through it and how to read through it. And it's got to be very clear. Don't get psyched out by other people in the waiting rooms. Everyone has their own process before an audition, and everyone gets anxious and worried and worked up. So just trust in yourself, trust in your own ability, and don't worry about anything that anyone else is saying. You are there for a reason, and you will be the right person for the job if that is the case. Have a good breakfast. Make sure you've eaten something. Nothing worse than going into an audition with a rumbling tummy. And then believe in yourself and be polite to everybody in the room. You never know who might be sitting there. If someone's taking your name or ticking off your name, they might have some kind of sway or say in the casting process. Always just be polite to everybody that you meet. Great. Cool. And then what else? Sam, your question about as an adult, what is the audition process like? That's from Samuel Little. The audition process is really varied. I'll give you the example of Matilda as an audition process. That's probably the most intense one I've experienced. And that process starts with you have to bring in a piece of music of your own choosing, so something that's already in your rep folder in the style of the show, sometimes 2 pieces. With Matilda, it was 2. And you'll sing in front of a panel, and you might just do 16 bars, you might do the entire song. It totally depends on what they're needing to hear and how much of a character they need to see. It can totally vary, so there's never a right or wrong with that. And then after that, you may then get recalled. So the recall process for that would be being sent some material, which might be some script, might be a bit of a song. Then there could be a dance round. So for Matilda, there were 3 dance rounds. So we had 3 different routines. And then there were 2 singing and material recalls. So at this point, I think I've done, that's 6 rounds. So an initial 3 dance rounds, 2 recalls for material, and then a final. And the final is where everyone turns up, all the producers, all of the directors, MDs, choreographers, anyone that has a stake in the show comes to just see if they are happy to sign you off as the person for the show. So that's probably the most intense, really, and that was 7 rounds for Matilda. Normally you're looking at sort of 3 or 4 rounds in the audition process. And it's a bizarre, totally bizarre process, really. You'll spend your whole time thinking about the next round and trying to not think about it, but knowing that your entire mind is completely consumed by it. But it's also incredibly exciting. It's something really, really exciting, and makes you feel incredibly alive about just putting yourself out there, and knowing that you are showing people the skills that you've developed, and that you're there doing the thing that you trained to do and that you absolutely adore doing. So although auditions for a lot of people are really daunting, if you try and flip that on its head and see it as an opportunity, then it's quite an exciting process, really, to be involved in. I hope that helps you a bit, Samuel. Evangeline, your question about what do you recommend to do when picking an audition piece, I think I've sort of answered that already. So hopefully what I said previously helps you with that. But yeah, it's all about finding the right flavour for that period of musical. So hopefully that's done. LVN, how do you find out about auditions and apply for them? So that's a very good question. There are lots of different routes of finding out about auditions. If you're represented by an agent, then your agent will bring those auditions to you and normally ask you whether it's something you're interested in and whether you'd want to apply for them. So they would be sorting that out for you. You get an agent at the end of your drama school training, usually. However, there are plenty of people in the industry who aren't represented by agents, and in that instance, there are other routes in which you can find out about auditions. There's a brilliant database called Mandy Actors, which you pay £20 a month to subscribe, and that is just a constant database of lots and lots of auditions, more so for sort of shorter runs and smaller shows, but it's a really good way of building up your experience and your repertoire and your CV. So Mandy Actors is a really good thing to be on. And then, so Spotlight is the main database of all the big auditions. So when you become a member of Spotlight and you pay a subscription, you'll see all of the auditions for all the big shows and everything that's going on. But generally, your agent will then put the application forward and will then promote you to the casting director. So you won't have to do anything personally in getting the audition. Your agent will then go from there. Hope that makes sense. Matilda, your question about musical theatre as a stable career, I'm going to come back to a little bit later on, but that is a very good question about backup plans, but I'm going to talk about that later in this chat, so hopefully I can answer that later. Let me just, same with Eleanor, you've asked a sort of similar question, so I'm going to answer that for you a bit later on. Maria, your question about would I recommend agents at all, and do I think there's a point to them? The brilliant thing about having an agent is they become your sort of middleman and you're the negotiator. So it means you're never having to have difficult conversations with producers or with casting directors or anyone, which I personally, for me, I am terrible at. I'm such a positive person, and I'm desperate to make sure that people like me, that actually I would be terrible at negotiating my contract and my fee. So that's why I love having an agent. Equally, there are lots of people who like to feel like they have the entire control of their destiny and of their career. And at that point, an agent might be less right for those people. And also, if you're wanting to sort of dip into the industry, but also have other irons in the fire of sort of teaching work and other bits and bobs, then at that point, a bit of self-representation could be right for you as well. So there's no right or wrong, really. It's quite a grey area. But the brilliance of having an agent is they have more access to auditions because they get sent them first before all the performers. And secondly, it's really helpful to have someone there on your side to also negotiate contracts, to deal with any difficult issues you might have had, any complaints, anything at all that comes up. They can always be the person to speak for you rather than you having to speak for yourself. So yeah. Soraya, you've got a question about performing a song during an audition. So how do you perform a song during an audition? Does it depend on the show itself? Yeah, totally it does. It totally depends. And that's all about doing your research and doing your homework before going into an audition and knowing what is the feel of that piece and what is the feel of the show. If you're going into a show which is absolutely huge and is going to be performed in a huge auditorium, something like the Palladium, and a great big show like, trying to think of an example, probably Les Mis or something like that, where you know that you're going to have to really throw out your performance, then you want to bring that energy into the audition. Equally, if you might be performing something at a much smaller venue like the Union or the Soho Theatre or somewhere which is a much more intimate space, you want to then bring that intimacy into the audition as well. So it's all about understanding what the production is going to be like and then bringing an intelligence into that performance when you take it to the audition. And equally, be prepared to go in strong, make a bold choice with how you perform your song, and then be prepared that the director in the room might say, great, thank you very much, I'm now going to give you a couple of notes. And they might ask you to rework how you perform that song. So just because that first initial presentation that you offer of your song may well not be the final one, so that they may ask you to work it again. And again, coming back to the experience of auditions, that's a really fun thing I find, because that's where you get to really show off your skills as a versatile performer. You get to say, great, well, I performed it for you like this, and now here's a completely different version of this song, and I have the ability to change like that in an instant. And if a director can see that you have that versatility and that positive attitude to change, they'll want you in the company. Great. I'm sorry. I'm just quickly looking through these, and it seems like most of these questions now we're looking at probably into my next section. There's one more on the audition. Zinnia, your question: are there any songs I wouldn't recommend for an audition? Contrary to what I said before about Stephen Sondheim, there is a bit of a taboo about bringing a Sondheim piece to an audition, because often the piano parts are really, really complicated, and musical directors don't thank people that much for bringing Sondheim. So I would say, unless you are auditioning for a Sondheim show, or a show of a similar sort of musical technicality, don't bring a Sondheim to an audition. But definitely have one in your rep folder for when you are auditioning for a Sondheim. Also, never bring anything that's too long. So the general rule of thumb is that your music should be across 3 or 4 pages, and should last about 1.5 minutes. So if you're suddenly bringing a Jason Robert Brown piece which is 9 minutes long, the audition panel are going to cut you off at a certain point, and that might inhibit you from getting to, say, the big high note at the end, or a big section that you really wanted to showcase. So before you go into that room, know which is the bit of the song that you really want to show off, a part of your voice that you want to show them, and then if you can, cut the song down so that that's what they're hearing. They don't need to hear 4 verses at the start before you get to that big key change or that big moment. So that would be a recommendation for that. So Kira, you've got a question about auditioning for colleges and musical theatre courses. I've sort of touched on that in terms of looking at getting the syllabuses for all of them and looking through that. But my advice for those auditions would be exactly the same as auditioning for anything else. Go in with a yes and a can-do attitude and a positive attitude. Know your stuff. Know your material inside out, back to front. Never ever go in feeling like, oh, I'm not sure I can remember that the lyrics for that second verse. You just need to be so confident that you know it and that it's in your brain, because you're going to have a level of nerves that then is sat on top when you go into it. And that happens, it doesn't matter how long you spent in the industry. I've been in the industry for about 10 years now, and every audition is still nerve-wracking. So the biggest thing I could say is just know your stuff inside out, and also perform it for, if you can, for family, for friends, anyone that allows you to have that feeling of nervousness before getting into the room. That really helps. I often perform for my parents before I go in for an audition, just to give me that little jolt of nervousness. So then when I go into the actual audition, I've already done it once. Great. I'm just going to do 2 more questions on auditions. Sorry to anyone that has asked other ones, but hopefully I've sort of answered most of it within my ramblings, and then I'm going to move on to another section. Let me just see these. How fast is the audition process? That's a question from Imogen Ross. Totally depends on the show. So the hardest thing about the audition process is the wait, particularly after you've done your final round. So for Matilda, I waited about 3 weeks after my final round to then get an answer of whether I was going to get the job. Other ones you might find out in the room. So it's really important to prepare yourself for the resilience you're going to need for the wait and for how long that might take. You also might get through to a final round, think you've done it all, and then a week later you get a call from the producer saying, actually, really sorry, could they come back in? We want them to do another round in front of a couple of different producers. Every audition process is completely different, and it's never about you as a performer, really. It's all about ticking boxes and then creating the jigsaw of who's gonna fit in, what covers might work, who's going to be able to understudy certain people. There are so many different elements they have to fit together in order to make a show that you just have to go with the flow of the audition process and become completely zen about how you approach them. And every time they ask you to go for another round, just see it as another opportunity to sing the material that you are so brilliant at singing or dancing or acting. Great, I'm going to move on to another section because I'm just aware of time. So for sort of the next section, I'm going to talk a bit more about the rehearsal process and what it's like to rehearse for a show, particularly a big West End show. So I'll sort of trawl through the questions already, but then also if anyone has any specific questions about that, fire them in and I'll try and find them within this. Let's have a look. Well, actually, these sort of some of these are quite interesting. So, Lucy, you've got a question about, do you have to be a really great dancer to get into the industry? And the answer is definitely not. You have to be a really great dancer to get into certain shows which really demand a high level of dance, like Cats, 42nd Street, big shows like that. But there are such a plethora of different types of jobs for every size, shape, and ability of performer. I'm not a dancer first, right? I trained as a singer and then developed my dance when I started working, but I certainly wasn't a great dancer to start with. So know what you're good at and celebrate that and bring that to auditions. But then if you know that you're not a great dancer, maybe now is the time to be getting into those dance lessons and just give yourself the best chance. Only because the more skills you have, the better the chance you have of working consistently, because you'll be bringing different skills and you'll have different things to fall back on. But certainly it's not a prerequisite to be a really great dancer. So no need to panic if you are not. Okay, interesting. So this is a question from Daisy, which is, do you continue to rehearse at all once the show is opened? And the answer is definitely yes, particularly in long-running West End shows. The first set of rehearsals are for the sort of first cast, which is everyone who's been cast in the main roles, as in the entire company, but in the roles that you have been cast in. And then once all of those rehearsals are finished, you then move into understudy rehearsals. So generally, particularly in West End shows, everyone will have an understudy or a cover or more than one understudy. And because everyone can take holiday, everyone covers each other. So then those rehearsals will run alongside once the show's opened. And then also with a show like Matilda, because we have kids in the show, we then rehearse during the day with the kids, because we have 3 different teams of kids. And each time a new team comes in, during the week. We then do an extra run of the show in the day so that they make sure that they're up to speed with us. So yeah, so rehearsals really do happen quite frequently. And depending on the type of show, it depends on how many rehearsals there are, but generally you can expect to continue to rehearse. Louisa, you've got a question about, are there any shows I wouldn't recommend for actors starting out? No, there aren't, because ultimately, if you're right for a show, you'll be getting it. If you're not right for a show, then you won't work on it, and that will be the one that I wouldn't recommend you go for, because you won't be right for it. So you will sort of find that the industry takes you on a journey that you wouldn't necessarily think you might have gone on. My first job was in a show called Taboo, which is the Boy George musical, and the roles I was playing were completely out of my comfort zone and were so different to ones that I would ever have thought I would have played. But it was the most incredible learning experience. So yeah, you sort of allow the gods of theatre to take you on that journey, really. Eleanor, you've got a question about if you're an understudy, do you attend all rehearsals for the part you're understudying? Really good question. So I'm doing that at the moment with Pretty Woman, so I'm understudying the lead role. And for that, I sit in on all the rehearsals that the leads go through, and I take notes, and I kind of keep listening to all of the acting notes the director's giving. But also then we have our own separate understudy calls where we get to have our own process as understudies, and we get to learn the blocking up on its feet. So you sort of get a double whammy really of rehearsals when you're an understudy, and it's a bit of it comes with its own personal challenges, but also it means that you are constantly alive and you have that wonderful nervous energy all the way through the run, because you never know when you're going to get thrown on. So that's quite exciting for a year-long run of a show. So you've got a question about, would there be a physio during the rehearsal process? Yeah, it's particularly on shows which are really physical and really dance-based. They will have access to a physio. There are quite a few who work in the West End who you would get sent to, and the company would sort that out. So yeah, that would be navigated by the company. Ben, you've got a question on how do you cope with the continual late nights from rehearsal and when the shows are on every night? Very good question. The industry, it is a challenge, and there is a real challenge that comes with managing your sleep, managing your energy levels, but you just shift your pattern really. So particularly when you're in the rehearsal stage, you find it's early starts, and then it's a long day, and you finished at 6 o'clock. And you're back home, and there's a bit of a routine of just get home, eat loads of food, because you'll often be absolutely exhausted and needing nourishment, and then early to bed, and then back up again. You do that for a few weeks of rehearsal, and but then you get into the show routine, which is totally flipped on its head. So then you're working, you start at 6 and you finish at 10:30, and you're getting home at whatever time it is, quite late. So then your sleeping pattern changes, but you have to allow yourself still the same amount of sleep. So you sort of have to get used to sleeping in a bit later, getting up a bit later, and your day just shifts by a few hours. So there's always a bit of teething problems and a bit of navigating that, but yeah, it's generally fine. You get used to it. Lucy, how long was the rehearsal process for Matilda? The rehearsal process was 12 weeks for Matilda, which is absolutely mad, and no other show does that. But that's because we have so many children in the show, and the choreography is so complex and so specific that we had to be allowed such a long length of time. So that was that was quite unusual. Most shows it's about 4 weeks. So you do normally a week of reading through the scripts and sort of getting to know everyone and learning the music of the show, and then you have a couple of weeks of putting it together, and then a final week of running the show over and over again, and then you get into tech rehearsals, which last for a few days, then a dress rehearsal, and that's it, and then you're open. So that's sort of the general pattern for most shows. Owen, your question about, is it common to rehearse with any set or props for a big show? or are you thrown into it when the performances come? Totally depends on the show, and it depends on their budget. With something as big as Matilda or Pretty Woman, we had the entire set built for us in a rehearsal room. So we had all the props, everything, all the tables, most of the costume, because it's so much of it is about working with the props that you have to have them in the rehearsal room. By contrast, certain shows, you won't have anything at all, and you'll just have a totally empty room with bits of tape on the floor telling you where bits of set are going to be. But that might be shows which are much less physical and less onus is put on knowing how to use the props and use the set. So yeah, it sort of depends on that. Your question of how many rehearsals you have before a show, I think I've just answered. So hopefully that's fine for you. Ruri, is there a chance that an examiner may not pick you for Les Mis or a big show if it's your first show, regardless of how well you performed? I think the answer let me just think about that for a second. Yeah, well, I suppose what you're asking there is it unlikely for you to get straight into a huge show like Les Mis straight out of college? And the answer is yes, it is unlikely, just because there aren't that many huge shows, and there are a lot of actors. And there's a huge thing to say for not going straight into a big show as well. My first sort of 4 years really of working were in small fringe shows and tours, and that's where I really felt like I learned the craft, and I got to see the country, and I got to meet so many actors and so many performers and learn loads and loads of new skills. So for me, I would say that shouldn't be your worry. The worry should never be about getting yourself into a big show. The worry should be about how can I grow as a performer in those first few years, and how can I take loads of different skills from all the people that I work with, so that then in a few years' time, I am the whole package, and then I can start to worry about building my CV with bigger shows. Chloe, yeah, interesting question about how much freedom do you have with developing your own take on a character during rehearsals. Again, I know I keep saying this in most of my answers, but the truth is it totally depends on the show and the director. With a really long-standing show like Les Mis or Wicked, there will be less freedom within your rehearsal process, purely because the show already exists as a package, and it was directed by a director a number of years ago, and they want their show to remain the same and to remain very much their version of it. So there'll be a little bit of leeway in terms of you bringing your own flavour, but generally they will want to see the same performance that the previous actor had done. And there is actually quite an enjoyable challenge in doing that as well, because that taps into a whole different set of skills that you have as an actor, as a mimic, and as a sort of there's a sort of investigative quality and a sort of forensic quality to that, in terms of like working out how can I replicate that performance again. However, in a totally brand new show, so we've found this in the process for Pretty Woman, because this is the original West End cast, we've had a lot more freedom. And actually, there have been 3 or 4 characters that have just come out of the rehearsal process who didn't exist previously, and the actors have just brought their own flavour to the room. And the director said, "Great, let's really explore that. Let's bring that person in." So yeah, so it depends on the show, and it normally depends on how far into a run that show is about how much freedom you get. Zinnia, how long are warm-ups typically for a show? So warm-ups typically. You would get a 10-minute physical warm-up and a 10-minute vocal warm-up. That's sort of the standard, really. That might vary depending on how big the show is and how physical it is, and so, you know, if you're doing Cats versus Phantom of the Opera, you might have a longer physical for Cats or a longer vocal for Phantom. But generally, they sort of sit within that sort of time frame. Sarah, good question. How often does an understudy actually get to perform? Is it sometimes frustrating to learn the roles and parts but not get to perform? Yeah, really good question. It sort of depends on the type of show. So in a West End show, you're pretty much guaranteed 4 weeks worth of going on to perform, because everyone takes 4 weeks of holiday or 28 days of holiday. So you sort of know you're going to get that amount, and then anything on top of that is for illness. So, for example, I understudied Mr. Wormwood in Matilda, and I did about 90 performances in the year. So that's because our Mr. Wormwood got laryngitis, and I ended up going on quite a lot. But I would have been guaranteed 28, and then I ended up doing quite a lot extra. So yeah, it's so. And your question about, is it frustrating to learn the roles? It can be. Obviously, it's much more frustrating if you're in a show where there isn't a holiday allowance, which happens on tours and on much shorter runs. So you can look at it as that's frustrating, because you want to go on and you know that you have the ability to perform the role, but equally you have to justify it to yourself by saying, do you know what, I am learning a new skill here, and I'm absolutely I'm developing a character, and I'm having the freedom to practice my craft and to learn something, which then means in the next audition I'll then come on another run, and I've got another new thing to offer. So yeah, frustration is something which you will feel across the board in the industry. It's a really frustrating and difficult industry, but it's about management of that frustration. Eleanor, you've chosen to study music and drama at uni rather than at a drama school. Definitely won't put you at a disadvantage. I did very similar. I went to uni, and studied drama. I went to Leeds, and it's not been a disadvantage at all. If anything, it's given me a greater breadth of understanding of the industry. So trust that what you're doing is the right thing. Great. I'm going to probably move. Yeah, I'll move us on to another topic here. Let's talk about, what do you do when you're not working? Because as we've sort of touched on before, there are lots of complications with the industry, lots of challenges, and with that comes plenty of time out of work. Obviously, at the moment, the entire country is out of work. The whole theatre industry is closed down. So that comes with its own challenges. So let's any questions about that? Let's just do 10 minutes on that. Also, I apologise at this point that I know that I may have missed out certain people's questions, and I hope that I'm rambling and being broad enough that you're still getting answers to those questions as I'm going with that. So there's a question here of, can you live off the pay, or do you need another job? Sort of depends on what the job is, how long the job lasts, and what your base wage is. I generally find that I always have another job on the go, and I've been fortunate enough the last 3 years to be in West End shows, sort of in the ensemble and with covering, but I've always had another job. So I generally do lots and lots of teaching, some of it with BYMT, some of it as a singing teacher, and I run an education company on the side. But then I've done so many other side jobs along the way. I play sax and guitar, so I do lots of gigging and lots of bits like that. But then like singing waiters, I've done hosting for conferences. I've done some photo shoots for book covers, like everything. There are so many things that you can do with the skills that you have as a performer. You have such currency in the skills that you have and your communication ability, that actually there are loads of other jobs that you can be doing alongside to just give you a bit more stability and allow you to really work in the theatre industry for longer, because you have something to complement it. Let's just have a look. Louisa, just a question about pay. How much more does a lead role get paid in comparison to the ensemble? That's probably an answer you don't really want to know, but the truth is that, particularly if they're celebrity or well-known in lead roles, they get paid a lot more than the ensemble. as I'm discovering, as I'm going through the industry. But what you get paid in the ensemble is a completely workable living wage, and you slightly have to just forget about the fact that the celebrities are getting paid 10 times the amount that you're getting paid. But then equally in shows where they're not casting big names in the lead roles, the difference will be less significant, but they will obviously still get paid more. Chloe, your question about have I tried some screen acting as well as theatre? Yes, I have. I've done a few episodes of Doctors on the BBC, and I've done sort of 2 or 3 short films and roles in films, and absolutely loved it. Loved every moment of doing that. It's a completely different style of acting. The way to envisage it is that theatre is all about projecting your acting out into the auditorium, whereas TV and film is all about reducing it down to the size of that lens, so that every tiny incremental facial expression and bit of physicality is picked up by that camera. And that comes with that's a really exciting challenge as an actor, to know that you have to be so alive with your thoughts, because the camera will pick up on every single element of that, and you don't have big set and music and everything else to then facilitate it further. Matilda, yes, I want to come back to your question about what do I think about musical theatre not being a stable career? Do you think it's wise to have a backup plan for if it doesn't work out? So what I would say is that I won't lie to you about that musical theatre is an incredibly unstable career. It comes with serious challenges, and there's often the sort of joke and the adage that, you know, working in acting is the hardest profession in the world, and I think it probably is true in terms of the instability that it brings. That being said, I'm 10 years in and I'm still doing it. So the payoff of when you are working is just so worth it. When you're working, it is the greatest job in the world, and there's nothing like it. And there's nothing like that feeling of immediacy and having an audience and the feedback of that. But you're absolutely wise to ask the question of, should you have a backup plan? And the answer is always yes. Never rest on your laurels. If you have another skill, if you have something that you are also passionate about, just develop it. Even if you find you're having a great run and you're doing, you know, you've had 5 back-to-back West End shows, there's always going to come a time where you have a bit of a period of being out of work. And at that point, you want to be able to jump straight into something else. So that's where, for me at the moment, I can't perform in the show because the theatres are closed. So all of my work has gone into teaching. And that all that means is that then I know that I can jump back into theatre when the work comes back again. So always do have a backup plan. And particularly as intelligent young people, now is the time to be developing those other skills. Apologies for pronunciation. I think it's Peniel. Do you spend more time working in musical theatre than being at home or outside musical theatre? Good question. So my career has taken, it's had ebbs and troughs. I've had sort of 9 or 10 months where I haven't worked in theatre at all. The auditions have dried up, and I've found that I'm doing other work, and either working from home or going out and doing bits and bobs. And then equally, there's other times where all of my work is in musical theatre, and I find I'm completely exhausted because I've done so much theatre for a really short burst of time. So yeah, so it's quite varied. Interesting question here about rejection from Jenny. Yeah, how do you deal with rejection and feeling like giving up? That's the biggest challenge and the biggest frustration of working in musical theatre, is the constant rejection. The really, really important thing that's fundamental to your mental health when dealing with it is knowing that it's not about you. You have to trust that your ability and that you're in an audition room because you're good enough, and you will be good enough because you'll have done the training, and you will absolutely be a fully composite and fantastic musical theatre performer. However, you might just not fit that role, or it might just be that, and this sounds really callous, but it's true, you might just be too tall or too short for that role. at that time, there will be umpteen different reasons why you won't get a role, which won't be about your ability. So every time, and there will be lots of rejection, and you will feel like giving up, but you just have to keep reminding yourself that you are good enough. And also, there's a real positivity in do other performing that's not audition related. So if you find you're not working and there's a period where the auditions aren't going your way, go and sing at a cabaret. Go and create a YouTube channel for yourself. Do something where you're going to get positive feedback from people who don't work in the industry and who are completely amazed by your voice or your acting or your dance. And just remind yourself just how highly skilled you are. Oh yeah, I've answered that question about famous people. Yeah, famous people do get paid more, unfortunately. Let me just scroll through a couple of these. I've answered lots of these already. Libby, did I always know that I would have a career in this industry? I suppose I did, really. I started performing when I was 8 in an Amdram Saturday morning kids thing. Before that, even I spent my entire childhood dressing up. I had a dressing up box, and I changed characters about 3 times a day. So I think I always knew that I was going to end up as an actor or working in performance in some way. Yeah, so I think you do know, and also I think you need to have that. I think if you can imagine doing anything else as a career, do that, because unless you completely and utterly love performing and acting and being on the stage and creating characters and losing yourself in the escapism of it, then it's not the right career for you. You have to love it with every fiber of your being, because it is such a challenging industry to be in. And I'm sure all the people I'm speaking to today, I'm sure you feel the same as me, that performing is nourishment. So it's what we all want to do. But yeah, so I have always known. Yeah, definitely. Louisa, that's an interesting question, which is very prevalent to right now. If you're in a show and it closes, how much notice do you get? So with a West End show, you get 2 weeks notice for a show. So you get two weeks of pay, and then that's it. And that's it. It's a really rough, bitter pill to swallow, because when a show closes, it happens like that. And that's what's happening at the moment to the industry in this crisis. But equally, at the same time, plenty of shows then open the same week that other ones close. The theatre industry is a constantly moulding and movable, wonderful sort of kaleidoscope of different shows, and different ones are coming in at all times. Yeah. Oh yeah, interesting question. If you have a job, this is LVN, if you have a job in musical theatre, is it still a pleasure, or does it become more of a hardship or a daily routine? That is day to day, it changes. Some days you are absolutely flying high, and you can't imagine doing anything else, and it's the greatest thing. And another day which might be a matinee day where you've not got a big audience in, and you're just a bit tired, and it can feel like a real slog, especially if you're 100, 200 shows into a run. So the truth is that your emotion towards the performing of the show will change on a day-to-day basis. So the best thing to do is, when you know that you're really loving it and it's a pleasure, just completely invest in that and love those moments, to then give you the resilience and the strength to weather when it feels a bit more like a hardship in a daily routine. Great. I'm just going to, how long have we got? Okay, so I'm going to slightly transition into sort of more questions about, sort of more general questions. So I'm going to maybe jump around a little bit here, and try and cover a bit of a broad section of things we haven't really talked about. So Matilda, you've got a question of, do you think it's a good or bad idea to go to university and study something that's not musical theatre or drama as a backup, and then once you have your degree, try and apply to the drama school? Yeah, I think that's totally an option. If you have another passion that you would really want to explore at uni, you won't be shooting yourself in the foot by going and studying that and then going and doing a postgrad at a drama school. As I said, I went to uni first, and I've got lots of friends who studied languages or music. Even I've got a couple of friends who studied as medics and then ended up deciding to go to drama school and ended up in shows. There was no right or wrong. So if you feel passionate about something else, then do that for a bit. Amy, at what age did you start acting? Does it affect your career later on? Oh, I think I've answered that already. Yeah, I started performing probably when I was about 3 for my parents, and then probably in earnest from when I was about 15, which is when I started my BYMT summer projects, and that's when I really started to think that it was the one for me. There's a question about from Layla about, is it competitive, and are there lots of self-obsessed people? Yes, there are. The industry is incredibly competitive, and there are plenty of people who get wrapped up in their own abilities, but they are the ones who won't become your best friends, and they're the ones that will fall by the wayside ultimately in a company. And you very quickly learn to have a radar of those people, and sort of find that you steer clear of them. But equally, often I found this as I've got older and realized that the people who are self-obsessed are often those who have the most insecurities, and actually once they feel like they are liked within a company, they can really settle down and can ultimately become really good friends of yours. So it's all about being generous with your own spirit. And I would never ever want people to think that they have to, stamp on others to climb up this sort of greasy pole of theatre. Just look after each other. It's a difficult industry, and producers and casting directors determine our destiny. So look after each other as actors, because if we don't look after each other, no one else will. Oh yeah, that's interesting. Sarah, your question of have I ever felt disappointed if I'm in the middle of a show and another show comes up you really wanted to play in and could have waited for, but you can't audition as you're busy with the show you're in? Yeah, that happens. Plenty of times that happens. You'll be halfway through a run and suddenly this incredible brand new show comes over from Broadway and you've been desperate to do it and you can't. And you just have to, at that point, presume that fate is playing its hand and you're not meant to be doing that show. And that also goes for shows that you don't get on auditions, that you think, I'm so right for that and I was so meant to get that, and then it doesn't go your way. And at that point, you just have to say, do you know what? That just means that the way has been cleared for me to get into a show that I am meant to be in, and it's going to open another door for me. And that's the only way really that you can navigate the industry, because it's so unstable and it's so inexplicable in what it offers you. You just have to trust in the power of fate and look after each other in the industry. I'm just talking a bit quicker now. What was my experience in BYMT like? It was the absolute foundation for me of going into the industry. The complete turning point was when I did a couple of summer projects and realised that I was just completely and utterly in love with musical theatre and everything that it brings and all the various forms of it. So BYMT is and still remains the best training ground I've ever had, including drama school training. BYMT is completely brilliant, and you will never get as much freedom as you do on a BYMT project. So that's the time where you get to explore all of your capabilities and the total breadth of yourself as a performer. So yeah, absolutely loved it. Kira, you've got a question about what courses would I recommend in the UK? You live in Ireland and the course is very limited. The choice is limited. Yeah, I completely understand. There are so many courses. I'm going to just throw a few names at you, which you can scribble down, but also there might be opportunity for I can send an email to the BYMT office and they can maybe forward it to you, just so you've got a list. But the big ones, really, you've got Mount View Arts Educational School, you've got the Royal Academy of Music, you've got LAMDA, you've got RADA, Guildford, Guildhall, where else have we got? Central School, Speech and Drama. And it's probably not that helpful for me to be just rattling these off the top of my head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a comprehensive list so that you can have a bit more of that, and hopefully that'll help. Jenny, quick question about active musicians. I'm an active musician myself. I play sax and guitar, and it's been really fruitful for me in terms of working. So my advice would just be get your instrument up to the highest possible standard now before getting into the industry, and you will be so wanted and so highly desired as a musician. Also, if you are at a high level on one instrument, pick up another. Now is the time. If you can have two to offer, then you'll be even more attractive as a performer to casting directors. Chloe, I'm going to finish with this one. Do I have any dream roles? Oh, such a good question. I think I'd like to be in Les Mis ultimately, because that's the one that ignited my passion for the musical theatre back when I was about 12. So I would love to play Enjolras in Les Mis, and also because I know that my nan would just love that, and she's been desperate for me to be in that show ever since I joined the industry. So that would probably be my dream role. Guys, thank you so very much. This has been a real pleasure, and I hope it's been helpful to all of you. All I can say is best of luck if you are thinking of going into the industry. It's challenging, it's unstable, but it's also the greatest industry in the world, and I completely love it. So I wish you all the best of luck, and in these challenging times, look after each other, perform, keep singing, keep dancing, keep acting, and thank you so very much. Have a lovely rest of your Saturday.